Guten Tag, hello, and welcome, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Melinda Crane, and it is my pleasure to moderate this panel session on integrating transport networks for sustainable growth and development. And I'll just say one brief word before we begin in regard to language. We will have Chinese and French on this panel, as well as English and possibly German, or will you speak English? Okay, up to you. So you may need a translation, and please do avail yourself of the headsets if you do. I see that most of you do already have one. So the overall topic of this year's summit is, of course, transport for a changing world. And at the risk of stating the obvious, among the starkest changes that we have witnessed in the past 20 years is the enormous rise in economic interdependence. Our world is more interconnected than it has ever been before. Globally and regionally, economic ties are widening, deepening, and growing more complex. But transport links are not always keeping up. Political and regulatory structures frequently impede the emergence of seamless services. Transport policymaking and network planning suffer from lack of coordination between neighboring jurisdictions and among national, regional, and local authorities. That hinders investment, and it imposes higher costs than necessary, both in the form of direct costs to users and, of course, in terms of the burden on environment and climate. Over the next hour and a half, we want to highlight challenges and share success stories. We have a roster of speakers with an absolute wealth of public and private sector experience to share. And connectivity is what this session is all about in more ways than one, because our panel spans the globe. It connects Latin America, Asia, Northern Africa, and Europe. And we are also looking forward to hearing from you, ladies and gentlemen. In the last part of our session, we will be very eager to hear your questions and your remarks. So without further ado, I will now introduce our speakers. It's my pleasure to introduce, first of all, Najib Boulif. He is Deputy Minister of Transport in the government of Morocco. He has also served as Deputy Minister for General Affairs and Governance, and he has been a member of the Moroccan House of Representatives since 2002. He's a founding member of the World Forum for Islamic Parliamentary Representatives, and he's also a member of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Great to have you with us today. And on my right side, Mr. Rüdiger Grube is Chairman of the Management Board and CEO of Deutsche Bahn and DB Mobility Logistics. Previously, Dr. Grube was a member of the Board of Management of Daimler. He was responsible for corporate development and for all Northeast Asia activities. And he's also served in the past as chairman of the board of directors of the European Aeronautic Defense and Space Company. A pleasure to have you with us, sir. And here on the outside, we're going in alphabetical order here, very democratic. Here on the outside, we have Marc Juhel. He is Sector Manager of Transport at the World Bank. He's a port specialist. He joined the bank after heading the ports department at a French consulting group. He's co-leader of the World Bank's Ports, Rail, Aviation, and Logistics Group, and also co-manager of its Trade Logistics Group. And he was instrumental in founding the multi-stakeholder platform Global Facilitation Partnership for Transportation and Trade. Next to him is Jorge Kogan. He is Senior Advisor to the Vice President of Infrastructure at CAF Development Bank in Latin America, and he's head of the bank's Transport Group. He was formerly Secretary of Transportation in Argentina, and he has extensive experience working with both the private sector and the public as a consultant to a wide range of firms and organizations. A pleasure. I've been forgetting to clap. And an extra clap for Monsieur Juel as well. And finally, here on the left is Bizin Zhu. He is Vice President and General Counsel of the China Communications Constructions Group, Vice President of the China Communications Construction Company Limited. It is the largest port construction company in China and is a leading company in road and rail construction as well. Mr. Zhu also serves as Vice Chairman of the Association for Shipping Exchange across the Taiwan Straits. Great that you can be with us. We will be looking in the first part of our panel at some of the challenges and also some of the best practices that arise in terms of trying to foster cooperation between planners at different levels and between different geographical sectors. Later on, we're going to talk about investment. What steps can different stakeholders take to make sure that we have the money where we need it when it comes to integrating transport services? And we will also be talking about regional coordination. So I'd like to start out with getting a viewpoint from our policy makers, and I'll start out with Deputy Minister Boulif. The MENA region, of course, was long viewed as lagging on regional integration, both in overall economic terms and also in terms of transport. But lately, you have been catching up. In recent years, there have been some good reports, but they tend to focus on ports and on air transport. In other respects, the record is somewhat patchy, roads and rail still lagging behind. What's your outlook? How do you see things developing, and what does it mean for you in your work? Oh, yes, of course. Sure. Yeah.
Ok, merci. Je vais quand même parler en français, donc pour la traduction.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will address you in French. Thank you very much for this question. I think it's a question that is right to the point. You have mentioned a problem of regional interconnection, and especially the MENA regions, that is Middle East and North Africa. This is a region where we did indeed lag behind in transport and networking. But over the past 2 decades, we have made efforts, significant efforts, and hence I think we can say that if we split the region up in a northern and a southern part, then we can say that the countries belonging to the southern part have gone to great length to improve their networks, both in aviation and in shipping. And this is also true for land transport. So that means that these countries are now members of the Open Sky Agreement when it comes to aviation, and in connectivity of freight and passenger transport, we have also achieved many things. We have amazing growth rates of approximately 70% over the past decades, and that means 7 to 8% per year. And this means that we have reached a level that is clearly higher than that of the northern countries in terms of growth. And this is also true for an element that, in my opinion, is also important. We are currently in a phase of social networking, and after that phase, we are stepping into a second one, and that means that transport will become a development tool, a tool for strategic development, that is. The period of time is 20 years in Morocco, where we have strategies that go to 2035 for sea transport, aviation, road and rail transport. 25% of the strategy will be directed to the latter. And for planning, this is very important because here we have a good level of development. It is also, of course, positive for investors. The situation is transparent for them, and the services for citizens are to be designed in a positive way, and that will lead to a general well-being of our country. In the MENA region, there are many promising examples in aviation, for example. We have the 5th largest airline carrier, and the aviation sector development shows that we are taking on a leading role in the region. But then there is also intermodality, of course. Do we want to be competitors vis-à-vis all the different other modes of transport? It is quite difficult to be competitive in that field, and this is why we have to find decisions, make decisions, but that depends on the future of transport and the region.
rail. As far as I understand it, there are track gauge differences between different countries that mean that you can't necessarily simply connect national railway lines. You do need an effort to construct new ones as well as upgrade the ones that you have. Now, you have an agreement on international railways in the region, as I understand it, that set out technical specifications and a timeline, supposedly by 2020 for project completion. Where does that stand today, and what are the impediments here to better integration?
C'est vrai qu'au niveau de l'intégration, si on peut parler de l'intégration
on a regional level, but also in the MENA region itself, in the transport sector, we have to catch up a lot because political decisions in the transport sector so far have been made on a national level. Urban planning in the different countries used to differ widely. There are countries with 90% of Sahara Desert where transport is quite difficult over land. And then you have other regions with a high degree of urbanization, a density of cities. So it's quite complicated to talk about cooperation in the MENA region and to make it visible. But of course, it is correct. There are certain approaches that have been developed. There is a trend towards specialization. Take Morocco, for example. A country with 350 kilometers of coastline. Here we develop strategic ocean shipping, but also aviation, and we try to move closer to Europe, to open up to Europe. We are a Mediterranean country, but we also want to open up towards Africa. And this maritime strategy, the maritime airport strategy, we also combine other strategies because with Royal Air Maroc, we have our national airline, and we want to transform Casablanca into a regional hub. We want to bring it into a pole position so as to be well connected both to Paris and Dakar and sub-Saharan Africa. In doing so, we want to increase the visibility for a country that has decided strategically to bring forward the strategic development of different transport sectors. We're quite ambitious in the railway sector as well. You have just mentioned it. Until 2050, we want to have one route that goes from Northern Europe, Denmark that is, to the south, to Mali, even further south into the Sahara region. And horizontally, we want to make sure that a train can travel from Casablanca to Cairo in Egypt. This is our vision. And that means that we want to develop this network in order to bring the peoples of the region closer together.
We need to get truly systemic thinking in terms of transport integration. I'd like to come to you now, Mr. Kogan, also as a former policymaker, and talk about the challenge that faces Latin America in terms of urbanization. You're facing enormous growth and sprawl. What kind of challenges does that pose in terms of transport integration?
As you probably all know, Latin America is the most urbanized continent in the world. So almost 80% of the population living in cities. We have 3 or 4 of the largest 10 megacities in the world. New megacities are in formation, and a new cadre of middle-sized cities are growing there. Having said this, the first challenge is that a lot of people is coming from the outside. The levels of poverty and inequality derived from this urbanization, which is a little bit disorganized, creates new challenges to the authorities. And here is where we can see evidence of how wrong things can go when you don't have the right land use planning, you don't have the coordination among the authorities. And despite the fact that these cities are growing without control, some of the cities have been able to respond with the right investments, although always below the levels of needs of these investments. But if you have a big picture of the whole region, there are very few cases that are successful, and I will come to one feature that has shown that success is possible, and these are the BRTs, the bus rapid transit, that had been evolving in the region quite substantially. But we are facing what I would say is one of the critical issues, and this is the lack of good institutional arrangements. You see most of the Latin American countries, authorities at the national level, provincial level, and local level with responsibilities that are related to the use of the land and some of the parts of the transport system. And there is a disarray between the powers of this authority and the money they have available to make decisions, and mainly decisions related to investment. So the need of coordination of different levels of authorities is critical here. And then in these very large metropolitan areas, you have municipalities within these metropolitan areas, in some cases up to 50 different mayors that have to coordinate among themselves how they will deal with one transport system which really serves the whole metropolis. So you have a combination of, at the same level, coordination between the mayors, and then the relationship between this level with higher levels of government. In many cases, the money collected through the taxes are distributed by the federal government. And if you add to this the fact that the mayors and the central government could belong to different political parties, then you have a big cake that is very, very difficult to eat. And very easily you can see how money is distributed according to the friends or members of your party, and then the resources that the mayors can count with are more related to their political relationship than to the demands of their people. So really, this is probably the first thing that one has to face in this region, and this is to try to bring a more aligned institutional arrangement and have long-term regulations that could allow things to develop in the proper direction. However, there are a couple of cases in where continuity, which is another requirement for this process to go ahead properly, think that most of the mayors are in office 3-4 years. It's almost impossible to really put in place big pieces of infrastructure in such a short period of time. And when you change government and you change policies and you change political party every 3 years, generally the newcomers feel themselves that they are founders of the new land, and they want to start everything from scratch, which makes things even more complicated. There are a couple of cases that are very interesting. One is Bogota. For 3 consecutive years, the policy, the transport policy, the land use policy in Bogota had been, although under different people, following the same lines, and they have been able to build this famous now Transmilenio system, which is one of the most developed BRT systems that we can find in the world. As a result of this experience, suddenly BRTs became a possible solution. Up to that point, I think that most of the authorities in many countries thought that unless you built a metro or a railway, there was no success as a transport planner, as a transport authority. It's very difficult for countries that are generally poor to accumulate enough resources to build railways or metros in the cities. But BRT is a fairly good solution. And
may I just ask you why the institutional and political barriers that you mentioned in general, why do they not apply in the case of the BRTs? Why have the BRTs been able to surmount those kind of obstacles?
Very straightforward answer is you can put a BRT in place in less than 3 years. And if you last for only that short period of time, you are able to start and to inaugurate, to get the picture as a politician, which is always good, and to show people that you have done something, and that generally gets the backing of the people straight away. So the followers of this decision, after seeing what had happened with the predecessor, will probably continue doing the same. We can see that in Buenos Aires, where a very recent pseudo BRT has been inaugurated. The mayor has been reelected with 65% of the votes. And in a condition in where his political view is completely opposite to one of the federal government. The federal government had publicly recognized the success of this BRT and have announced, despite the fact that the mayor of the city is from a different party, that the national government will now follow the success of the city of Buenos Aires and will start to implement BRTs in other places of the country. So, as a demonstration project, worked very successfully. The mayor got reelected, just only one line, that was it. So you can see this in Bogota, and there are about 30 projects going on in Latin America. BRTs are being built everywhere. And wherever you have a BRT, immediately you see as a result some kind of integration, which is limited to the area in where the BRT is operating and some of the surroundings, because generally these are being designed as a trunk-feeded system, that is a system of feeders into the main line. And there is where you come and see another problem, and you can see this in Bogota. While the Transmilenio system is operating pretty well, the rest of the transport system in the city is still as bad as it was in the past, with individual operators, no control, the routes are out of control, not tariff or fare system in place. So probably as a result, you deepen up the level of inequality within the same city. So you resolve part of the problem, which is better than not to solve anything, but in the end, you have a new problem, and this is the growing demand of those who are left out of the solution for finding a solution for themselves, and the pressure on the authorities, which is good to happen, started to grow up, and the authorities really start to need to think about how to give a response to this more an extended demand for transportation.
We'll talk a little bit more about promoting greater system integration later on. And by the way, that question of social inclusion and social pressure will be coming up tomorrow in our plenary session. So do come and hear what our people there have to say. I'd like to come now to the private sector representatives on our panel and start with you, Dr. Grube. It has been 20 years since Germany introduced its Bahnreform, its basic restructuring of the railway lines of East and West Germany as a consequence of unification. Of course, designed to fuse those railways, both of which were loss-making enterprises at the time, and turn them into one single, efficient, competitive enterprise. Has it been a success?
Man muss nicht vor 20 Jahren.
You don't have to start 20 years ago. You needn't start 20 years ago. The famous German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt said in '81, Germany cannot afford two bankrupt institutions. That's what he said, namely the rail business and the armed forces. It took another 12 years until 1994, when Helmut Kohl, as the then federal chancellor, introduced the railway reform. And why did he do so? Between 1950 and 1994, passenger rail travel, as far as the market was concerned, dropped from 36% to 6% as far as market share was concerned. And for cargo travel, it dropped from 58% to 38%. And wise people, smart people have calculated the following. In the following 10 years, it was 300 billion Deutschmarks, which would need to be invested in order to maintain quality and availability of the railwork network. There was no competition. There was a monopoly held by Deutsche Bundesbahn. All those things were taken together. Then reunification happened, reunification of Germany, and all that together led to a reform of the railway system. And politicians did the right thing. You cannot have a successful integrated transport network with sustainability in its development if your mayor and your chancellor changes every so often. You need reliability, you need security of planning, and only then you will be able to manage it well. Politicians in Germany did something very smart. The basic law, the federal constitution, so to speak, was amended, and it was laid down that Deutsche Bahn, so we were not called Bundesbahn anymore. Deutsche Bahn is a private enterprise. And with that, there was a clear assignment of roles for the operation of the rolling stock and the maintenance and the management of the track network. Here, Deutsche Bahn is responsible as a private enterprise, and for replacement capex for the existing network and for added capacity, that's where the government is responsible. And this was a very important success factor. You have to clearly define roles. Who is responsible for what? And in Germany, that was a great success. Have the targets of the railway reform been met? The answer is a resounding yes. In the whole world, there are not as many competitors as for the German railway network, 360 competitors. Railway transport increased by 58%, passenger traffic by 36%. The market has been opened, and what is very important, we are a successful enterprise, and I can be proud of that when I say we are the company which grows the most in Europe, 40 billion euros in sales. 20 years ago, that was just 16 billion, and we have been able to improve our EBIT by 2 billion euros. And that is a very good bottom line. Of course, we have challenges we have to meet, but this is the basic prerequisite. If you have such an integrated network, if you don't conduct it in an economically viable way, you will not be successful. What is very important is define clear responsibilities, and if you don't do so, you will not be successful.
To the Deutsche Bahn's place within the entire system, you say rail has seen an increase both in terms of freight and passenger, but critics say that increase actually should be larger. In terms of road versus rail divisions, actually rail should be stronger than it is. And we should have seen a larger modal shift if the system were truly as integrated as it could and ought to be. What would you answer to that?
Meinen Sie jetzt mehr Verkehr auf die Schiene?
Yeah,
okay.
Do you mean more traffic onto the rails? The answer is yes.
In einem wahrhaft
There should have been more traffic onto the rails in a truly integrated system if integration had been truly successful.
Gerade haben ja eine positive Entwicklung gezeigt.
Over the last 20 years, there have been positive developments, but we are still not where we want to be. Have a look at German highways. At the moment, there is still too much truck traffic. I don't want to criticize that. I always say, when we talk about modern mobility chains, about modern integrated transport networks, it's about smart integration of transport. For instance, the Hamburg port, as one of the largest maritime ports in Europe, would not be as successful with 130 million tons of bulk cargo every year if it hadn't been for the railway system. Or take, for instance, the airports. At the moment, all the airports are connected via high-speed train. We've done that in Frankfurt, in Cologne, in Düsseldorf. We've done it in Leipzig. We try in Berlin. We've done it in Stuttgart as well. This is the intelligence, not to just have competition, but to link them in such a way that the advantages can be tapped and disadvantages can be done away with. I can proudly say Germany is logistics world champion #1 and export champion #1. And this is also due to the fact that we have an integrated infrastructure. Germany, other than that, is a decentralized country compared to other European countries. the railway system, couldn't it be even more decentralized and more flexible? This is also what critics say very often. There could be even more points, even more links. Well, what about the future? You have to distinguish between two systems. One is high-speed, long-distance trains. They are based on an economically viable basis, and here Deutsche Bahn is responsible only. Regional trains are tendered, and there is competition. The 16 federal states have a hand in that, and there is a tendering process and then a job for between 8 to 10 years. Sometimes we win that job, sometimes we don't. This kind of decentralization is correct, has turned out to be correct. What could be better is the following. We always have to focus on the customers. The name of the game will be to work in a customer-centered way. The customer doesn't care whether he is in traffic network 1, 2, or 3, but he wants to have an overarching transport network. And here, those who are responsible have to cooperate even more closely. We need one systems integrator. In Europe, there is a discussion whether operation and network should be separated. Somebody who is responsible for infrastructure on a standalone basis, and then the Bahn operates that. I'm against that. If you want to have punctuality, safety, comfort and convenience, if you want to travel efficiently, you need a continuous improvement process. Those people managing infrastructure belong round the table just as those who maintain the rolling stock. And where you don't do it in an integrated way, you don't have a good product. Countries like Japan, for instance, or Switzerland or Germany are best, and that's not for nothing. The Chinese as well, because there is a one-stop shop. I'm a clear proponent of competition without discrimination. Everybody should have access to the rail network, and we need rules of play, but we need one systems integrator.
To come to China now, and you, of course, have been investing very heavily in your country in transport infrastructure. You're facing many of the challenges that have been mentioned here by other panelists, ranging from urbanization to dispersal, geographic dispersal, and, of course, pollution and bottlenecks. How well do different authorities in your country coordinate when it comes to transport planning and design?
At the moment, there seems to be a technical problem. We don't get the Chinese translation.
Construction Company Limited, and it's a great honor and pleasure to exchange ideas regarding the transport issues. And just now, Madame make a very good suggestion. We had been highly considered by our government.
这个中国近30年以来啊，经济取得了快速的发展。
In the past 30 years, China really enjoyed a very rapid progress in terms of economics.
我们政府呢特别注重交通基础设施建设的先导性的作用。
And transportation, logistics had been on the high priorities of the government strategies.
应该讲呢，中国的交通基础设施的建设是我们中国经济持续发展的一个非常重要的基础。
Well, I am proud to report you that transport progress, transport development is one of the major reasons why China made such a good progress in the past 30 years.
应该讲到现在呢，中国的交通基础设施啊，日益趋向于完善。
Well, we are seeing that we are trying to improve our transportation system. We are still in the stage of improving it.
经过多年的建设呢，我们目前呢，在公路方面呢，已经建设了总的通车里程是432万公里的公路，其中呢有10万公里的高速公路。
In terms of the road transportation, up to now we have about 4 million kilometers road work are already constructed, and among these 4 million kilometers of road, 100,000 of them are expressway, we call it highway.
有10万公里以上的铁路，其中呢高速铁路呢已经通车1万公里，在建的高速铁路呢还有12000公里。
And also we have about 100,000 kilometers of railway already in the place. And among these 100 kilometers of railway line, 10,000 of them are, we call it speed rail or high speedway. And this high speedway, we have another 120,000 kilometers of high speed rail are under construction.
我们的港口和航道的建设也取得非常好的成绩。目前呢，1吨级以上的港口泊位呢是1886个。
In terms of port transportation, also we had made a very good progress. And for the time being, we have a total about 1,688 port with a capacity of 10,000 cargo, 10,000 tons of sauropod.
我们的航空运输的发展近几年也在加快。
Also, aviation, we are making some progress.
去年呢，那个航空的吞吐量超过100万人次的这个航空港，就是有61个。
There are 16 airports with a sauropod of 1 million passengers annually.
These are very impressive statistics. I would be curious now to know about the connections between the different sectors that we're talking about, and in particular, the connection between ports and intermodal transport forms. Dr. Gruber mentioned that important connection between ports and the hinterland. I am told that this is something that you are considering right from the outset when you do port construction, that China is well known for taking a focus on intermodal, and yet multimodal access is not always the result. I'm told, for example, that in intermodal rail, you face some very significant challenges. Movement of containers, for example, not always a priority on the rail network. Can you tell us something about that crucial intermodal link and integration between port and rail?
对，你提的问题很好，我刚才是讲到我的第一个问题。
I just now I'm trying to give you a brief about our systems, and of course I'm coming to your points.
对，那个我们刚才呢，把中国的交通基础设施这几年取得的一个硬件设施方面的情况，我给大家做一个分享。
I just want to share our what we have achieved in terms of the infrastructure construction achievement.
那么中国的交通基础设施到现在为止呢，我们也还存在很多不足。
We still have, in terms of the integration and transportation system, there's still a lot of to be done, lot of things to be improved.
一个呢是各种运输基础设施的建设，过去是分属于不同的部门在管理。
And I'm sorry to report you that in the past, we have different ministries which are responsible for different transportation systems.
所以呢，没有做好非常好的协调和统筹。
So it's very difficult that if the administration of the transporting system belong to the different ministry, and so the integration is not properly done.
有的呢比较超前，有的呢还显得不足。
And some of them are in a very advanced stage, and some of them are still in the old fashion.
所以整体的运输效率的提高呢，是我们中国目前正在追求全力以赴去做的事。
So despite a lot of transporting system had been infrastructure had been done, and the efficiency of the transporting system still need a lot of things to be done.
一个呢是从政府的层面呢，我们把政府的关于交通基础设施、交通运输的管理的部门呢进行了整合，成立了统一的交通运输部，把原来的体道部、民航总局都整合到统一的交通运输部下面来进行统一的管理。
The government, the central government, already realized this is a problem, and in the past 2 years, the central government had done a lot to improve this system. One of the key steps they have done is the central government is trying to put all the transporting system into one ministry, and now we have a ministry of transport, and this ministry of transport is not only responsible for marine works and the road expressway works, and also they are responsible for railway and aviation. These two parts belongs to a different ministry in the past. So a better coordination and integration can be done with the Ministry of Transportation.
这样呢，在运输规划方面，就从原来单一的运输规划变成了综合的运输规划，进行统筹的规划建设。
So a better planning can be done with this one ministry, and instead of a single, my understanding is that in the past they just respond for road, so they just when they make planning they just consider road, and now they are not considering road only, also they are considering the connection of railway, road, and aviation, including ports.
这样呢，我们把过去做得好的做得更好，做得不好的把它赶上来。
So the government is trying to correct the mistakes that we have done, and the past something had been done. They are trying to make more progress, and something had not been done, and they are trying to correct the mistake and improve the system.
刚才呢，您谈到了中国的城镇化建设和环境保护的问题，我觉得这是非常好。
And we are very happy, Madame mentioned about urbanization and environmental pollution issues in China.
中国的城镇化建设是现阶段中国经济持续发展的一个重要的推动力。
Well, the urbanization is one of the strategic policy of the central government are trying to keep the Chinese economy more energetic.
中国有13亿人口。
We have our population is 1.3 billion.
我们还有大多数的还是农村人口。我们希望通过了持续的努力，把城镇化的人口呢提高到60%以上。这样，我想对中国的经济呢是一个可持续发展的推动力，对世界来说，对人类来说也是一个贡献。
Among these 1.3 billion Chinese people, quite percentage of them as the living condition is still supposed to be improved. So the thinking, the policy of the central government is that through the urbanization movement, majority of the Chinese people's living condition, living standard can be increased, can be improved considerably, so that we can make China a better place for the human beings.
中国这个正在进行工业化进程的过程当中，所以呢，环境问题，包括污染问题，都积累了很多的压力。但是中国政府呢，一直在努力去保护环境，去减轻污染，特别是在交通基础设施建设方面，我们在建设的同时，特别注意污染问题的解决、环境的保护。我们提倡呢，绿色交通、绿色建设。
Well, just now, Madam mentioned that about environmental pollution issues. we have to admit that environmental pollution, environmental damage is one of the major elements one of the major challenges the Chinese government is facing. You know that we are in the stage of the industrialization in China, and during the industrialization stage, it's true that some side effects have taken place, especially to environmental pollution, and this is the side effect of the industrialization process, revolution we call. And now the government already realized that something should be done to protect the environment. And now in terms of the transportation, and we have two slogans. One is we call it a green construction or a green transport policy.
I'd like to move on to our last panelist and then come back to that just a bit later when we talk about investment and what your big investment priorities are for the future. So thank you very much for that. Mr. Juhel, I'd like to hand over to you and ask you to try to tie all these threads together. Certainly we've heard a theme from a number of our panelists about the extremely important role of taking into account the political economies of transport planning and design, described by Mr. Kogan, but also described by several others in terms of a long-term view, coordination between ministries that may be sectorally so focused that they can't get out of their silos. What would you say are the essential elements that we need to get truly integrated transport planning and politically feasible integration?
Thanks, Melinda. Well, we just heard a bit about the China experience in the recent period. Well, it's good to keep in mind, indeed, that over the last 15 years or so, China has implemented possibly one of the most impressive development programs of transport infrastructure in modern times, both road and highways and railways by the thousands of kilometers. We also know that during the same period of time, China achieved an impressive reduction of extreme poverty. And maybe it's not unreasonable to believe there is some kind of relationship between the two. The title of this session is Integrating Transport Network for Sustainable Growth and Development. Well, in the World Bank, when we say sustainable growth, we say and we mean inclusive growth. Growth that everybody can participate in and benefit from. And this doesn't happen by chance. Transport is one of the best possible vehicles, basically, to keep everybody together, to keep a nation together. And if you were to ask me or summarize a vision which will explicit the role of transport in trying to get to this sustainable growth pattern, I would say something like inclusive growth through inclusive transport. We heard in the plenary session about the social inclusion role of transport. There is no effective economy without an inclusion system that transport has a lot to contribute to. Now, that's nice from the semantics perspective, inclusive growth, inclusive transport. Now, of course, you need to go a little further in to see what it means in practice. And in practice, indeed, to, as you say, tie all those threads together and develop this integrated network we are speaking about, you need a lot of institutional coordination around space and function for transport. And what does that mean practically? Well, it means that a government, national authorities, together with local authorities in most conditions, will have to take a three-pronged approach to that. First, strategic, policy formulation, long-term planning. Then tactical, regulation and detailed planning. And finally, operational, creating the networks, providing the services, or organizing the market so that the services can be provided. So that's this approach which will provide the best chance of getting to a system which will actually serve all members of a community, all members of the country in their various spaces and regions. And if you want to illustrate that by a simple example, I'd like to take up again what George Kogan mentioned about urban transport, urban mobility, and the huge problem of institutional fragmentation, which does exist, and in many places prevents basically from implementing a real inclusive and effective transport system. So there are solutions for that, of course, creating supra-communitarian authorities, metropolitan transit authorities to overcome the kind of fragmentation and multiple institutional boundaries that typically exist. And that's one path to follow. But I like to mention again this word integration, because I always let's say, get a bit worried when we use the kind of buzzwords. And integration is a kind of buzzword we tend to use a lot. When you are faced with a complex problem, tend to say, well, let's throw at it an integrating approach, as if we have made significant inroads towards solving it. Well, to illustrate that in the urban setting, integration really means make the most of what exists, add a few things to help the whole work, but do not pretend that by a kind of waving a magic wand will turn a non-functional system into a functional one. To take a practical example, take Jakarta, huge metropolitan city, 37, 38 million trips a day. Jakarta is now implementing an MRT system. Indeed, because we hope it will help, but in the best of cases, the MRT system will carry 350, 400,000 passengers a day. Okay, so 37 million trips, 400,000. 90% of trips will still be done by regular buses, and there are tens of thousands of them. Integrating, what does it mean? It means indeed bringing this new capacity in terms of mass transit, but reorganizing all the bus network to make it feed into the system and improve the whole, just not believing that the MRT in itself will solve the problem. Throwing capacity in transport at a congestion problem, at a bottleneck problem, is unlikely to solve it by itself. You need to work it through so that indeed integrating in practice means making the most of the various pieces and put the glue together which will make them work. And then you get to this stage when you have this coordination between space and function, and hopefully the system works better.
Tell us a bit about what you have discovered in the research that your section at the bank has done about regional integration, to use that buzzword again. You've done a great deal of work on corridor management. When you hear about some of the issues, for example, that were mentioned by Monsieur Bouffier in terms of trying to promote regional integration in the MENA area, what can corridor thinking tell us?
Well, corridors and regional corridors are a great example of actually how to implement in practice this kind of integration policy. Well, first, because a corridor in itself provides, of course, a physical linkage. And let's thinking of regional corridors. So try to link two countries together. It provides a physical linkage, but more importantly, it provides an opportunity and a venue for harmonizing different aspects of regulatory conditions, of standards. We talked about standards in the plenary as well. And it provides the opportunity to get those standards harmonized. It provides the possibility to basically discuss the soft aspects of corridor management. Transport corridor first will basically make appearing the image of a large infrastructure. Infrastructure, we will go from a port to a border to another capital city, and indeed, in physical terms, that's what usually it is. But a corridor first can be multimodal, and I'll give an example shortly. And most importantly, for it to work, well, we need to address with it the soft side of the infrastructure. The infrastructure itself typically is not the most difficult to implement. The soft side of it, which has to do precisely with transport regulation, with cross-border agreements, with transit agreements, all that will be actually key to decide whether the corridor will actually help or not. And when it does work, and let's take a simple example again, the Eastern Corridor in Africa between Mombasa, so Kenya, which links Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, is probably one of the best examples of corridors which has actually been devised by those countries working together, negotiating a treaty back in 1984. So it has a strong legal framework. It's a multimodal corridor. It starts with a port in Mombasa. It involves road, rail, inland waterways, and pipelines. So difficult to be more multimodal than that. And it made it possible over a number of years, but to harmonize regulations. For instance, now there is a single transit document throughout the corridor, which makes it much easier to actually carry goods back and forth throughout the countries. It made it possible just to adopt a unified axle load standard. Very basic, but when this corridor was created, there were different axle loads, and you can imagine what kind of trouble road carriers were without that. The corridor helped achieve that. So a corridor can be an extremely powerful tool when countries come together or when the private sector comes together. Just go to the west side of Africa. The Walvis Bay Corridor Group has been a private sector initiative, enterprise coming together to say we all need to work better throughout the region. We need to improve integration of our transport network, and they managed to get the governments of South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia to finally sign a treaty also to help implement improvements throughout the corridor and to have all the soft tools which will make it possible for goods to move more freely. So corridors is a great example of really integrating networks, but they have to be looked at as both a hard and a soft project, basically. And then they will help, when this does work well, with indeed regional integration, because they will facilitate trade, benefits will flow at both sides of the border, and there will be a lot of mutual recognition between the various administrations, and that in itself will obviously strongly build regional integration over time.
Dr. Grube, let's stay with the question of corridors, perhaps, and talk a bit about 10T. The EU's infrastructure program is also now in its 20th anniversary, and it has just been reconceived with a new emphasis on corridors. Tell us, where do you think that will get us in terms of regional integration? How does the new focus, how promising is it in your view?
Well, the fact is that there are certain travel chains or transport chains, and they do not stop at national borders anymore. So that means it's a matter of course that people start off in Berlin, they want to travel to Paris or to London. And today, with our trains, we have 80 European destinations outside of Germany. That is 230 connections. The same is true for freight transport. So we have a European network, we as Deutsche Bahn as well. And if mobility chains or journey chains do not end at national borders, and if this is also true for logistics, then at the end of the day, I have to implement interoperable systems, and trans-European networks are part of that. The only thing that you have to bear in mind is that in Germany, we are a transit country. There are 10 trans-European countries in Europe, and 7 go across Germany. Germany has a mixed network, so a high-speed train drives on a German rail. There are regional trains, freight trains coming from 390 competitors, and getting a hold of that is actually quite complicated to manage that. And in Germany, our philosophy is that it's passenger transport in daytime that determines transport, and at night it's freight transport. But if management and administration of trans-European networks comes from Europe, from Brussels alone, then we have to take care that passenger transport is not replaced by freight transport. Because we've said it already today, a close network, close cooperation, excellent cooperation is required in order to handle the complexity of the issue and to damage neither passenger transport nor freight transport.
Both you, Vice Minister Boulif, and also from you, Mr. Kogan, about regional integration, taking in mind that we are talking in both of your areas about some very big divergences between the countries of the area. When we talk about social inclusion, within Latin America, very great discrepancies, as you mentioned yourself in your remarks earlier, a great deal of inequality, a great deal of poverty. How does that impact upon possibilities for regional integration? I'll ask Mr. Kogan first and ask you to pick up on the same question, Mr. Boulif.
Yeah, well, you can imagine talking about the political economics of each of the country. When you multiply this for the number of countries, you have a combination of political economics of many different countries. Latin America has, particularly South America, has another feature, which is the geography. It's a very big continent with very big barriers. Latin America is seen in the map as a block, but you have the Andes, which is 7,000 meters high. You have the Amazonas, you cannot cross it. So in fact, there are 3 or 4 different islands. Talking about the political environment and talking about the lack of institutions, in the year 2000, we have started, and I say we because 3 multilateral banks had helped the South American countries to start initiative for integration of the infrastructure. And this has been going on now for 14 years. Near 550 projects have been identified, but most of the work has been in trying to coordinate the planning efforts and the policies of the different countries to go to what Mark has mentioned, the software. Many projects had been built, but still there are difficulties to operate those projects. You have the infrastructure there, but you still waste a lot of time in the borders. The integration of the legislation, of the regulation is still to go. But this is a long-term exercise. These are fairly new countries. There are very new democracies, and they need to keep negotiating. And the good thing at this time is that these negotiations have not broken down as it had happened in the past. So this continuous exercise is probably going to mature in the future, and we may reach levels of integration that for the moment we are seeing at the physical level, but still is the need to complete the process, because being a continent that is mainly exporting raw materials, we need the transport networks to work properly. A lot of the wood economy of the last decade has been the result of the exports at very high prices, but we are still very inefficient in terms of moving and distribution the products. The logistics cost of Latin America is still very high, should be reduced to half, and I think that with this effort of the countries supported by multilateral development banks, which are bringing the cohesion and the arbitration role, I think, and the money for some of the investment, I think probably we will see in the future an improvement in this line. But takes a very, very long period of time, needs patience, and really needs the wills of the government to negotiate and to sustain, despite the changes, the political changes, to sustain the commitment that they are making in these processes.
Oui, alors pour essayer de revenir à votre question.
Well, I would like to come back to that question as well. Of course, there are major differences in the level of development of transport systems among African countries, but I think that's actually not the issue. As you know, there are, in the European Union, different velocities. This is also true for the European election that will take place this week. So there is a Europe of 2 velocities, and this means that there is a difference as well. But what is important for us is the fact that we are one continent, that we are a region that is changing, and we have to work together using different principles. And one of the most important principles is good governance. This is not a question of a lack of means for the funding of projects. I think it's an issue of good governance. And currently, we are looking into the sub-region. That means Western Africa, Eastern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. So we're developing sub-regions And accordingly, we should have analog developments in order to make sure that we have identical transport systems in all the different countries, and then we can take it one step further. Then all the different transport sectors can be connected. Of course, we have to say that currently there are certain companies that are well-positioned, companies that can take on this challenge, and there are certain ranges in the transport sector that can be integrated. Royal Air Maroc, for example, our national airline. Here we are thinking about whether or not it is possible to get together with 4 or 5 other African countries in order to found a Pan-African airline. So we will get together 4 or 5 countries working on the same principles. Then we will try to organize funding, and then we have sub-regional organization. That in turn will make it possible for us to follow suit in rail transport. That means that we bundle our efforts in the different railway companies of the different countries, and we will bundle our financial means in order to work with public-private partnerships or probably with government subsidies. And we will use this funding to finance projects. If profitability is possible, then we can start with other projects. Then it is possible, and we're thinking into that direction. We also even have some examples that can serve as a best practice. In my opinion, however, decision-making is a problem. Decision-making for integration is a problem. How can we make sure that there is integration in transport and that this integrated transport actually arrives at the citizens' benefit? So do we do that for our citizens? In some of the African countries, we have not yet embarked upon a phase where this is the case. We are in an earlier stage. Transport is a social issue, and sometimes we are trying to close down before we even get to connect and sell goods, for example. So on an African level, things have to develop a bit more. Still, the transport system is a social aspect, and we have to understand that it is an engine for growth and development. We have to be aware of the fact that investments in infrastructure can be a multiplier for all different economic sectors. So that means that the government has to make the first effort in order to generate a positive effect for the citizens, but for the collective well-being, for collective wealth, a better growth rate in general. Just one brief example. In Latin America, for example, we have just heard from our colleague that it is possible to come to a decision, and sometimes party affiliation is an issue. In our country, we sometimes have regional and national decisions. We have a guideline. This is a sort of timetable for the transport sector, both aviation and rail. And on a regional and a local level, we start getting the opinions of the elected representatives of the municipal and the regional level. So we listen to them, and in doing so, they are responsible for contributing their opinion. For example, building a railway line or a road, then they also have to be part of the decision, and they have to chip in when they want to have a road that leads to their village or their city. Royal Air Maroc, for example, back to aviation again. Royal Air Maroc has decided to expand the airline connections to different regions. There were very profitable regions, but there were other national connections where this is a problem and costs are too high. So what have we done? We walked up to the regions, to the municipalities, and we said, okay, if you want to have a direct airline connection, or if you want to have a daily one or 2 or 3 times a week, then it costs that much. And if you want to have a daily connection, then you have to chip in, and then you have to fund 10 or 20 euros per airline ticket. And what we'd do then is we'd do the rest. We'd account for the difference as an airline. And so we have developed airline connections to all the regions. And this is the basis of the transport sector. This is even a sustainable development. And sustainable means it has to be democratic. The transport system has to be democratic. And this is not only true for land transport, buses, and so on, but all areas of transport have to be democratic. I think Africa has a lot of options here. There are some airlines that are willing to invest in Africa, and if we manage to show that this is profitable, then I think there are many opportunities over the next years to come to continue developing it.
If you would please, to China before we do take audience questions. And coming back to the question of sustainability, which you were starting to address, certainly China is now making moves in the industrial sector to try to fight pollution, to try to switch away from some of the worst polluting industries and energy providers. But what about in transport? How will this change priorities in transport if you look toward sustainability and if you look toward trying to reduce your CO2 emissions? And if you would be brief, please. Thank you.
好，这个问题提得特别好，我简单的回答一下。
Okay, I would like to give you a brief question.
中国这个交通基础设施建设已经取得很好的一个水平。对于我们来说的话，实现可持续发展是我们的根本目标。
Well, sustainability is one of the goals we want to achieve.
因为中国经济的可持续发展对交通基础设施建设提出了更高的要求。
Well, the Chinese economic development have a high requirement, expectation in respect of transportation development.
所以政府呢，一是加强综合交通运输规划的这个设计。
And first of all, the central government have put more effort, more attention on the policy making. First, the policy making is about the comprehensive transportation design or planning.
二是加大交通基础设施的持续投入。
And the second policy the Chinese government making is for the continuous investment for the infrastructure facilities.
在投入方面呢，一个是政府直接投入，第二个是特别的支持鼓励民间资本的投入。
And in terms of the investment, of course, the government will continuously to make investment for infrastructure development. And now the Chinese government strongly support the private company or even personnel to make investment in respect of the infrastructure.
特别是对民间的投入，政府有很多鼓励的支持的政策。
And in respect of the private investment for infrastructure, the government make some very special policy, favorable policy to protect the investment made by the private companies.
我想一个规划特别的正确，第二个投入的政策特别的有力，很快会进一步促进中国交通基础设施的整体发展。
We can imagine if a good plan is there and if continuous investment is there, we do hope a very good transportation system will be there very soon.
我们第一可以创造高效，第二可以实现环境保护、绿色交通的目标。
And we hope that through this target and air pollution, environmental protection can be achieved by a very good planning and also sustainable development relevant to infrastructure can be achieved.
还有一点就是，中国在交通基础设施建设方面的科技创新也是非常重视的。通过科技的创新，也能够进一步的加强环境保护，
Another point that I have to report you, to mention, is about technical innovation in respect of infrastructure. And we do believe that updated technology relevant to the infrastructure construction can really minimize the effect of construction and therefore to minimize the effect of air pollution or environmental pollution.
在这个方面，我们要向发达国家悉心学习，来努力提高，促进整个人类交通的这种发展。
But in respect of the technical technology innovation, we really need to learn a lot from European and from United States countries, so that for our Earth, we should help each other and we should share our technology to protect our environment.
谢谢。
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a little bit of time for questions, and we have audience microphones here, 2 hostesses. So if you have a question, I have one back here, and I'll take 3 at a time so that we can get a few in. And please do tell us who you are and to whom your question is addressed.
Hi, my name's Corey Owens. I'm with Uber Technologies. My question is, I guess, primarily for Mark and Jorge. Historically, your banks have been able to leverage the money that you're offering in order to bring technical expertise, especially in transportation and especially in these kind of very large integrated regional transportation plans. How do your banks plan on dealing with the fact that a lot of the middle-income countries that could most benefit from transportation specialist expertise no longer have to go to your banks for the money? Increasingly, they can draw from private banks in China or elsewhere.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple of questions in bundle, so we'll keep that one in mind. I have one here in the front. Yeah.
My name is Tom Hofmeister. I've got a question, one to Mr. Gruber and one to Mr. Ju. Your company is going from the west to the east to Trans-Eurasian Express, from Duisburg to Chongqing, I think, or some Zhenjiang, I'm not sure, but somewhere from Duisburg, right? And so you're expanding to the east, and your company is actually expanding from the east to the west. So somewhere you meet, somewhere your interests get maybe in conflict. So I want to know like how you try to arrange agreements on a transnational, transcontinental traffic by rail. And for Mr. Ju or his company, have you any interest to invest for infrastructure in Europe, except from you going to Africa, you're investing in Gwadar in Pakistan, I think. So are you any business doing in Europe too?
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll take one more here. I had one here on the aisle, the gentleman with, yes.
Hello, Thorson from the International Federation of Pedestrians. When I came here this morning from Barcelona, I had the feeling that I spent more time walking and waiting. And that is something to do with the integration. And I think also that the way we organize the transport centers should be taken into account, how long we will have to wait from one company to another, maybe train, air, ship, or whatever. That's one thing. The other thing I've not heard about in this is that around the world, very much of goods is transported by people. On their shoulders, their head, whatever. How do we integrate that goods transport in our chains?
Thank you very much. So I'll start with Mr. Juhel and Mr. Kogan in relation to the first question.
Well, first of all, it is not fully true that these countries are not going to the development banks for money. In fact, if you look at the level of investment in infrastructure in Latin America in particular, the amount of investment, taking international figures, is below 3% of GDP of the region. It's been said, we are working on analyzing this, that if you want to get levels of growth that are acceptable for having inclusion and sustainable development, you need to invest not less than 5 or 6% of GDP. So countries need to double the amount of investment that they make, and they are continuing requiring money from all the development banks that are in the region. But aside of this, we not only give help in technical terms if they only ask for money for projects. We generate knowledge, we disseminate this knowledge, despite the fact that the lending is not there for investment. So there is a technical cooperation program going on all the time, and to that extent, I would not say that there is a decrease in the level of support that the development banks, and in particularly in the one I work in the CAF, geared to the countries. I would say that the contrary. We have been growing among these last 10, 15 years in the amount of support and the money that we probably give to the countries to reinforce their institutions and to grow in their internal capacities, which we believe is the most strong impediment for these countries to grow, as I was describing in my presentation.
By the way, if you want to pick up on the point about pedestrians, any of you, please do that
Absolutely.
as well. Yeah.
And I'll just actually complement what Jorge just very rightly said. Yes, indeed, the financing, the money is just a part of the equation. It's still, however, part of it very much because in the World Bank Group, in particular, there are several arms. And we have a private sector arm, the International Finance Corporation. And the International Finance Corporation is very often called upon to help syndicate financing and basically making it possible for a financing for a particular project where it gets better maturity terms overall, enhanced credit terms because of the fact that the World Bank Group through the IFC is around the table. IFC itself will not take more than 25% both equity and debt mixed of any project, but it will enhance the credit terms, it will enhance the maturities. And indeed, as Jorge insisted, the knowledge bit is probably the main reason why middle-income countries still come to the bank to get access basically to the consolidation of experience and knowledge that we have been able to consolidate over time, and we're able to bring to bear in the best of cases to improve projects, to improve the design, to improve their insertion, the social environmental aspect of it, and we can help with the hard things like resettlements and the like. So that's, I guess, why we are still looked at to help in those cases. Now, pedestrians. Well, just keep in mind that in the developing world globally, I mean, by far the largest share of users on the road are not motorized. So they are pedestrians, they are cyclists, it's animal traction equipment. So that's the people who are using the roads. The roads we contribute to build. And that's true in rural transport, that's true in cities as well. So integrating transport, making actually transport safe and accessible for everybody means making it safe and accessible for non-motorized users as well. And that will mean when it comes to designing new networks, make the space for protecting those vulnerable users, but because on top of being the majority, there are also the majority of people harmed by unsafe transport. Road accident victims in the developing world, more than half are not in the cars. They are walking or cycling beside it and get hit. And that's typically the poor, the people we are supposed to help. So that's why actually we are insisting a lot today to systematically build infrastructure, transport infrastructure, be it in urban context or in inter-urban road, which are safe, which are forgiving, which are protecting all users. So yes, indeed, we pay attention to pedestrians. In an urban context, it means making sure we can give them the possibility to move without having to fight their way through car traffic. And that calls for upstream understanding of what it needs, but it's much cheaper to do that upstream than to try to correct later on the transport system, which has not been thought about for pedestrians.
Thank you very much. And now I'll go to that. Yes.
Sie haben die Frage gestellt, dass Sie offen.
You asked the question. Apparently, you observed that we go east. I have to add, we don't just develop towards the east, we develop towards the west as well. 310,000 staff worldwide, 7,000 in the US, 5,000 in China, 6,900 in Poland, Russia the same. I think our philosophy is that we grow together with our customers. You have mentioned one case, BMW as a car maker has a big plant in China, in Shenyang namely. So far, everything has been shipped by ship. We needed 46 days for that. But ever since the crisis, 2008, 2009, capital costs have increased. So we suggested to BMW a way of halving capital costs. And now every day we go by a train to Shenyang, 44 wagons, that's 11,000 kilometers through Siberia. And when you have a bird's eye view, every day there are 23 trains going to China in order to deliver components to that BMW plant. And that generates new examples. We cooperate with Hewlett-Packard, for instance. They have a computer plant in Shanghai, and their components have to be shipped to Duisburg. For instance, every day, over 600 kilometers, trains go to Duisburg. We have been able to halve traveling times, thus halving capital costs for our customers. However, your question has been whether we invest in infrastructure as well. The answer is no. Of course, we cannot lay our own tracks in Russia or set up our own infrastructure in China or Poland or Russia, but we cooperate. We have set up a joint company where the Russian railway company, Chinese and Polish railway companies are our partners, and that joint company wants to enhance reliability, costs, and quality. Our customer wants to know precisely where is my wagon, what kind of humidity, temperature inside, is the wagon safe, and so on and so forth. So this is state of the art. This is what the customers require, and we all cooperate very closely. So a railway transport across borders only works when you cooperate with other railway companies. And I must say that works very well. We have great relationships with our Chinese friends, I can say that. And of course, we advise on infrastructure, but we don't invest any actual money in infrastructure outside Germany.
中国交通建设集团有限公司呢，是一个业务已经遍及108个国家或地区以上的一个国际化的公司。
I'm happy to inform you that CCCC is a very globalization company, and we have our business in more than 100 countries around the world.
我们的这个努力所做的贡献，不仅仅是对中国做贡献，我们希望对全球做贡献。
Well, we are hoping that we will not only make our contribution to the development of China, we also wish to make our contributions to the development of human beings.
我们现在的国际化程度还没有达到我们的目标。我们目前呢，国际化程度大概24%。我们期望在未来的10年以内，国际化程度达到40%以上。
Well, despite our ambitious game, and I'm sorry to report you that our globalization, we have many offices outside, but the percentage of international business still consists only 24% of total business, and our target is try to have the international business to consist as much as 40% of the total turnover.
我们去年在财富杂志排名的世界500强里面呢，排的213位，但是呢，我们离一个真正的优秀的跨国公司还有很大的差距。
Despite we're ranked in Fortune 500 company, and our place is 213. Despite of this, and we still have a long way to go to be a true globalization company.
我们想努力成为一个优秀的跨国公司，想努力为全球的交通基础设施建设做出我们的贡献。
We wish that we will contribute our effort to make a connecting world and contribute to the development of the global infrastructure facilities.
所以呢，我们希望呢和包括欧洲和美洲，还有全球各个地区、各个国家的优秀的企业和我们有相同业务或者有 互补业务的企业呢进行合作。
We had some close cooperation with European companies and with the companies from USA all around the world, as a matter of fact. However, we are still hoping that our relationship, our cooperation relationship can be more closer in the future, especially with our counterparts, so that we can learn from each other and to make a joint effort for the infrastructure development of the world.
事实上呢，我们和包括德国、法国、意大利等等这些国家的一些我们同类的企业，比如说万喜啊、布伊格啊这类的公司啊，都有非常好的合作。
As a matter of fact, a lot of close cooperation had been done with German company, with a French company like Siemens, Honeywell, Vinci, Bouygues, KBR, many of them.
我刚才听你问的问题是，有没有可能到欧洲来进行投资？我想呢，我们如果有投资的机会，我们是会努力。当然，我们这样一种投资的机会呢，更希望呢，通过和欧洲的企业，合作的方式，可能这样的话更容易，来促进我们共同的发展。
Just now you mentioned that whether if CCCC had the intention to invest in Europe. And let me report to you like this. For sure, we have a strong intention to invest in Europe. However, our investment, we hope that will be carried out with the cooperation of a local partner. We hope that we can look for a strong partner in Europe, so that you know the market much better than us, you know the legal system, you know how to protect the interests of the company. And we wish that we can make a joint venture with a European company, so that we can make progress together.
谢谢。
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I think I should probably take that as last words and free everybody to go network so that you can go find those partners, perhaps at the reception that is waiting for all of us. So I will say thank you very much to all of our panelists for your contributions to this very thought-provoking debate on integration and its contribution to sustainable growth. And thank you very much to all of you in the audience for your attention and for your questions. And I wish all of you a good evening and see you tomorrow.